Hi, welcome to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Markwitt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
Today we're continuing our series about all the 16 personality types in the Myers-Briggs system. Today we're talking about the ESTP personality in the Myers-Briggs system, or the sensation accuracy personality in the Personality Hacker system.
Yeah, and this is an interesting podcast for me because my dad is an ESTP. So I've had some preconceptions about people of this type based on my experience with my father. And then we had some really great survey responses that helped me flesh out my perception of people of this type. I was always attracted to ESTPs in high school, had lots of friends that were ESTPs, and I've noticed that ENTPs and ESTPs that get together, that's when really big explosions happen. I noticed that I would oftentimes instigate probably a truly horrifying plan, and the ESTP would be totally up for helping me implement it. And so sometimes this can be a dangerous combination, and yet at the same time it's brilliant fun. It really is. So ESTPs, I've always had a special place in my heart for people of this type, and I would really love to get to the CAR model and break down the biggest influences of the cognitive function stack for people of this type.
Yeah, we really focus on how your mind is wired as an ESTP, not just your behaviors, but how you're learning information and how you're making decisions. In order to do that, we obviously work with something that's called the cognitive function stack technically. And we use a framework for this called the CAR model. If you go to our website, personalityhacker.com, you can type into the search bar CAR model. There's an article there that gives you a visual reference so you can follow along. There's 4 positions in this car: a driver, a co-pilot. In the back seat, there's a 10-year-old and a 3-year-old. And these are basically positions of mental processes inside your mind and how it's wired as an ESTP. We're going to break down for you right now. If you have that visual reference in front of you, you'll notice that there's a driver there. And for you as an ESTP, the mental process, what's technically called a cognitive function that's driving for you, is a process technically called extraverted sensing. We've nicknamed it sensation. Sensation is all about real-time kinetics. It's all about real-time sensory processing in the external world. So obviously this shows up for an ESTP in how they move through the world. Their senses are wide open, not just their 5 senses, but their sense of balance, their sense of time, their internal senses. All the sensational things they bring to the world are open, and they're perceiving or seeing the world through these sensational experiences. This shows up often in noticing a lot of detail, noticing a lot of physical detail, a lot of tangible detail. A lot of times this process allows ESTPs to be very in touch with their body and the physical essence of their body, and to see their world through tactile means, through what's observational, what's verifiable in the moment, what looks and sees and can be perceived to be something that's tangible and real right now in this moment, not speculative 5 minutes from now, not in the past, but what's happening right in front of my eyes, what's happening right now to me.
Yeah, so the details that people who lead with this process pick up, like you mentioned, they're not the same kind of details that people who use the memory process are picking up. So the memory process is technically called introverted sensing, and that's what sensor judgers, or SJs, in the Myers-Briggs system use. This is a little different. It's like you mentioned, it's real-time details as opposed to the details that we look for over time. And oftentimes the real time or in the moment details are things like you mentioned, body language, or what's out of place, or what should be happening in what circumstance or situation that's not happening. So it's observing details that are missing and observing details that are happening. And I think what's really fascinating about the sensation process is that we get this concept about sensors that all sensors want things to be reliable, but this is the big difference between the sensation process and the memory process. If you've listened to our podcast on memory, or the memory types, like the SJ types, we talked a lot about reliable things, and what's more reliable than something you've personally experienced and then incorporated into your memory, and then you have time to ruminate about it later. But that's not really the thing that people who use sensation are focused on. It's not really about reliable. It is specifically about verifiable. They want to be able to experience it for themselves. They want direct interaction with that thing if at all possible. And so sensation people become very focused on experiences, direct experiences. experiences, being able to put themselves in a situation where they're learning and understanding by direct engagement. And this is one of the reasons why they become so kinesthetically talented. And by kinesthetically talented, I mean they usually have extremely high kinesthetic intelligence. They're very good at manipulating their body. They're very good at putting themselves in an experiential situation and working their way through it. This makes them usually very good athletes. It makes them people who are very good at engagement through body language reading and knowing what the other person, like really subtle nuances of what the other person is experiencing based on them reading that person in real time right now.
Sometimes this can show up in performance also, like actual like stage performance, musical instruments, things that have to be tactile or done with a sensory in the moment experience.
Right. And the reason why is because getting this high proficiency in like experiencing the situation with your body, it generally ends up including things that are instruments because the mind remaps the body to include that instrument now. So it could be like an actual musical instrument, or it could be an instrument of tool, like craftsmanship. It could be a tool you're using. It could be a plane you're flying, or it could be a car you're driving. And that's why a lot of pilots are people who are specifically ESTPs, and race car drivers are ESTPs, and people who are like people who go to the Olympics are oftentimes ESTPs because they're so good at immediately remapping their body to include that instrument that now just becomes an extension of their body, and they use it so beautifully and elegantly. Now, that's not to say that everybody who has sensation as a driver automatically becomes an athlete. My dad certainly didn't, although every time he did athletics, he always was good at it. That just wasn't his focus. So I remember stories from when he was a teenager. He's now in his 70s, but when he was young, roller skating was kind of a big deal. And he was like this amazing roller skater. Even though he never really pursued it, he just slapped on roller skates and he was just incredible at it. And the same thing with every time he played baseball. He's like, yeah, I don't really like playing baseball. And he would talk about how, he's reverse wired and he would hit with his left hand even though he's a right-hander. But what he didn't say, and what I found out later, is that every time he picked up a bat, he was excellent at it. But that just wasn't his interest. My father was far more interested in things like chemistry. He was a chemistry major, and that actually speaks to his Copilot process. So the Copilot process for ESTPs is a process that's technically called introverted thinking, but we've nicknamed it accuracy. And introverted thinking or accuracy is all about what makes sense. It's very analytical. It's very much looking for congruency and incongruency in information and data. It's very technical. And so ESTPs can sometimes get, I would say, stereotyped as sort of a dumb jock, but I've noticed that frequently they are anything but. They frequently go into things that require a lot of analysis and quick thinking. So some of the sciences really are filled with ESTPs. I've noticed that a lot of deal making is done by ESTPs, people who are in high pressure business situations. My father ended up going into marketing and was excellent at deal making through marketing. He was a ad exec for a company down in Southern California, and he was really good at what he did. And I think it was because he was very good at reading another person's body language and being able to determine little nuances of what it meant when they showed up in a very specific way. Like he would be deal making with them and then they would quirk their eyebrow and that would be a tell for him. And he could read it almost instantaneously and he knew what he could push them to do. And so he got super good at reading people. He got really good at not being attached to an outcome, right? Because he was in the moment of adrenaline of doing this deal making. And he was not attached to an outcome and he would just see what he could get away with, right? And he was really, really good at it. He ended up being excellent. So all of his interests were in things that were looking for leverage points and optimization. And you could tell that that was very much the accuracy process for him. So he loved the adrenaline of a lot of the stuff he did, but it was coupled with that accuracy process, making it a far more cerebral experience than just a physical experience.
On the survey, we got some responses from ESTPs that said, sometimes it's a challenge for me to go into social situations because I feel like I am obligated to now take care of people, or I've got to show up in a certain social situation. And that certainly doesn't sound like that accuracy process that you're talking about, because accuracy really is divorced from the human component. It's about the metrics and the data, just the information itself, and really understanding what that means, void of human connection. And that sensation process is about maybe understanding body language and all this. So where is this notion from ESTPs we got feedback from coming from, where they feel maybe obligated socially, or they feel a little awkward socially, or like there's responsibility on them? If you look at the car model, right behind that accuracy process sits a mental process with about the development of a 10-year-old child. It's technically called extraverted feeling. We've nicknamed it harmony. And this is a big part of your personality as an ESTP. This shows up for you. It's very conscious for you. You understand it to the degree where if you're in a social setting, you kind of understand some of the expectations that are on you in social settings. You understand some of the ways that people are interplaying. When harmony is done well, someone that leads with harmony or has it as their co-pilot, they're very concerned about getting everyone's needs met in the situation that they're in. They're interested in making sure that people are getting along. There's a harmonious experience with everyone. And you can see that at a 10-year-old level, this can potentially cause some anxiety for you or some difficulty for you as an ESTP, because you show up to the world and you want to use that accuracy process to really get into the metrics and the data, the stuff that makes sense to you. And yet the world doesn't really care so much about what makes sense to you. The world wants you to interact in a social way. And so what do you have to use to interact socially? You end up going to that 10-year-old process. Now, this can be a superpower to some degree if that 10-year-old process is supporting that accuracy process. If harmony supports what makes sense for you in a social situation or whatever position or maybe job you're in or family dynamic you're in. But when you go there and you skip and bypass that accuracy process and you rely upon that harmony process to begin making your decisions for you in what you're going to do in life, that can cause anxiety. You can start to use it in a defensive way where you're maybe protective or you're critical, or you're showing up with anger or strong emotion that almost feels like it's happening to you when you feel maybe out of control. And our advice here, and we're going to harp on this a little bit more later in the podcast too, is to make sure you're not skipping that co-pilot process of accuracy. Make sure you're showing up first when you're making decisions, because both of these, accuracy and harmony, are decision-making processes. Make sure you're making your decisions with accuracy first and using harmony to support those decisions and aid you in those accurate, logical things that make sense to you as an ESTP first, and then use that harmony to support that.
A lot of times we'll call accuracy the process that appreciates and implements radical honesty. And as an ENTP that also has accuracy as my co-pilot process, I recognize how difficult this can be when people's impressions of you are antagonistic. If you've been radically honest and you observe something and you call things how they are, and the response you get is negative, or like, you should have not been honest, you should have just preserved people's feelings, that can feel really disenfranchising. You can feel like, well, isn't there a place for me? And observing what other people are afraid to point out, you kind of feel like the kid that's pointing out that the emperor has no clothes on, right? Like really, everybody's going to pretend that the emperor is not completely buck naked? Like, am I the only person saying this? And so there's a sense of like, maybe you're not acceptable because you do observe these things and you are willing to call them out, and now you're somehow a dick, right? And so for ESTPs, I mean, I experienced this as an ENTP, but I think ESTPs almost have this worse in some ways. If you lead with that process of sensation, which is really dialed into other people's facial expressions and their body language, so you kind of know what's going on with them. And if you don't stand up for your right to be radically honest and really hone in and develop the co-pilot process of accuracy so that you feel confident and comfortable there, if you skip it and just go to harmony, which is all about social expectations and what's socially appropriate, you can get really paranoid about what other people are thinking about you, right? Because you can read it. Like, you just said a faux pas and it's written all over the other person's face. And now you start getting paranoid about what other people are thinking about you. And that is a terrible place to live. I hate living there as an ENTP. I do this a little bit differently with my function stack, but I hate that feeling of like always caring what other people are thinking about me, or always caring whether or not I did the socially acceptable thing. I think one of the most powerful components of the accuracy process, once it gets truly developed and you're confident in it, is I love my accuracy process's egalitarianism. I love that it doesn't really care about social appropriateness. It only cares what's fair. Accuracy is really a lot about what's fair, despite what social status tells us. And so what I've noticed for ESTPs, and this is actually something that was echoed in the survey responses that we got, is that ESTPs have a tendency to have a soft place for the underdog. And I saw this in my dad over and over again. If the person is in a place that they are, maybe they're elderly, or maybe they've just had a rough time of it, or maybe, they're an animal. Like a lot of ESTPs really like animals. If they're in a position of vulnerability, I've noticed the ESTPs have a really soft spot for them. And I think that's one of the most overlooked components of ESTPs is how much of a soft spot they have for the disenfranchised, that they're really champions of people who are in bad situations. And that generally only happens when you really develop that accuracy process of egalitarianism and then supplement it with harmony, which is how do we make sure that those people are getting their needs met too? Those people should have a fair shake. We're just neglecting them and ignoring them. Why are we doing that? However, if you don't have the 10-year-old supporting the Copilot, if you skip the Copilot and go to the 10-year-old, now we just have a situation of worrying about social propriety and social expectations. And then it becomes all about you and how people are thinking about you. So that piece where, sometimes maybe people think of you as being cold-hearted or that you're willing to dick with people and why are you such an asshole, right? That whole image of people thinking you're an asshole totally changes if you actually really develop accuracy. Because now you're not being an asshole. Now you're just being radically honest. Now you're being fair. You're being fair-minded and egalitarian. And now you are a lot more open to having harmony, which is the part of you that reaches out to other people and really is supportive of other people and isn't worried about how other people are thinking about you, but actually is willing to be more vulnerable and willing to be more relationship oriented. You have a lot more confidence in doing that. And it's not a matter of thinking, oh, well, somebody's going to think that I'm weak or somebody's going to think that I'm a sitting duck. You don't have to think about that at all because you're not a sitting duck. You know that you're strong in radical honesty. And this is simply supporting that radical honest position.
Now, there's a final piece of your personality in this car model that we haven't addressed yet. It's that 3-year-old process sitting directly behind your driver. It's really the opposite of your driver. If your driver of sensation, is about real-time kinetics, it's about being present in the moment. This process that's at your 3-year-old position, we call it your blind spot. Its technical name is Introverted Intuition. We've nicknamed it Perspectives. Perspectives, or introverted intuition, is all about being able to watch your own mind form patterns to the degree where you can understand how other people's minds form patterns. It's about the implications of things. It's about understanding long-range, sustainable thinking and a lot of speculative thinking about what's coming down the pike. It's very different from being present in the moment, obviously. It's about perspectiving. When done well, perspectives, if someone drives with this or uses it as their co-pilot, they're literally able to shift perspectives and see things from another person's point of view to the degree where they can separate their own point of view from another person's point of view. But if you're in a sensation place and you're present and in the moment, it's very difficult to separate anything perspective from the perspective you see in the moment. You can't really see someone else's perspective when you're in this place. If this is your 3-year-old, oftentimes this will show up with a lot of speculative thinking that you're not sophisticated at as an ESTP to see. This can show up like paranoia for you. Anytime you're in a place where either your driver process of sensation is overtaxed, it's just worn out. It goes, man, I can't see the world right now. Your personality says, I can't see the world right now. Your mind goes, I have to rely on something else to perceive my world or see my world. I can't see it right now in the real-time kinetic moment. I have to shut that off. Well, now that perspectives process gets activated to perceive your world through. And because it's not developed for you, because it's your blind spot, oftentimes you can feel paranoid. You can start speculating things that may or may not be real or verifiable But because that perspectives process is going there, now you start to make connections and patterns that may or may not be accurate for you. They may or may not actually play out in the real world, but to you, they feel as real as ever because that's where you're at in the moment when you're overtaxed or stressed out in that driver process.
Yeah, this can show up as part of that fearing what other people are thinking about you. Because you can't really actually get into their perspective. You can only look for tells through body language or through what makes sense. Then a fear that other people are seeing you in a negative way, or, fearing other people's opinion of you, that can a lot of times be part of that paranoia. Like people are seeing you as less than. And sometimes this can show up as ego a little bit for an ESTP. They can get kind of an attitude about it. Like, I don't care what other people think. And anytime you say you don't care about something in an aggressive tone, that means you actually very much care. You're just trying to mask it from yourself. So this can sometimes show up as an attitude. It's very reactionary. Another way that it can show up is fear of the future, like fear of what's coming up next. And for an ESTP, you're really good at improvisation. You're really good at showing up to a situation, not necessarily prepared for it, but being able to just dance your way through. But if you're in that perspectives process, your ability to improvise, you might forget that you're so good at that. You might forget that you're very good at just spontaneously coming up with a solution in the 11th hour, or just being able to dance your way through. You might not have confidence in your ability to do that. And then now you feel unprepared, or you feel like you're not ready for whatever's coming up. And so that paranoia that Joel is talking about, that can show up as like a fear of what's happening next. One thing that was in the survey that I thought was really interesting, and I'd actually never thought of this as like in the specific words that this particular ESTP used, although as soon as I read it, I was like, oh yeah, my dad totally did that. He mentioned that he feels that the perspectives process shows up for him by having all these possible scenarios about the future, like 10 different opportunities, and wanting to chase all of them, and thinking that, all of these are like the best opportunity he can go with. But then once he chooses one, now he's stuck there. And I noticed that my dad was an opportunity chaser. He always had this like pie in the sky dream of, okay, like in 6 months, we're going to like move to Mexico. We never actually moved to Mexico, but every 3 or 4 years, my dad would make a plan to move to Mexico. And I'm not 100% sure why, but this was just something he wanted to do. But we did move a lot. My father was constantly moving us from place to place and opportunity to opportunity, which suited me very well. As an ENTP, I loved it. New experiences, new schools, new opportunities. I loved it. But my ESFJ sister and my ENTJ brother were actually jerked around by it a little bit. Like they needed a little bit more structure and a little bit more predictability. So for an ESTP, one of the ways that 3-year-old perspectives process can show up is by the next pie in the sky idea or the next opportunity to chase. And I think for my dad, it wasn't until he decided to root himself in something, like one particular focal point, one particular thing that made sense to him, and just to rest into it and to stay put for a little while, to focus on that one thing. And focus is actually a product of the accuracy process. That Copilot process of introverted thinking or accuracy gets really good at focus. It wasn't until he decided to develop that focus piece that he rooted himself in a single opportunity, and then he excelled at it, and he did very, very well. So that's another way that it can kind of show up in a bad way. Now, I understand the desire to do that, because I think one of the major challenges that ESTPs deal with is boredom. Like life is, especially mundane life, is incredibly boring. And if your sensation process, and by the way, if you haven't listened to it, I recommend listening to the Sensing Personality Types podcast that goes a little further into sensation. But one of the things that we mention is how adrenaline-oriented the sensation process is. It's very much about being ready to do anything at any moment, and your adrenaline wanting to kick in to service you in that spontaneous moment or that improvisation. But if your mind is always ready to hit an adrenaline rush and nothing gives it that opportunity, then you're just going to be bored. Like everything is going to be boring. And unfortunately, the world is set up in a fairly mundane way. I mean, as an ENTP, I totally sympathize with this. School is boring. We're supposed to sit and be chained to our desks, and we're supposed to learn by rote memorization. And there's so many things about school that is so boring. And then if an ESTP is interested in academics, which not most, but many of them are, like my father was a chemistry major. There are a lot of ESTPs that are interested in different sciences and wanting to go down an academic route, but that just extends the being chained to a desk. And then you get out into the working force, right? And most of us are knowledge workers at this point, and now we're chained to a desk there. It's just one situation after another of being chained to a desk, which is maddening as an ENTP. I can't imagine how horrifying it is as an ESTP. So one thing that is very important to remember as an ESTP is that you have the ability to craft your life however you want to. You can choose literally anything you want to do. And there are plenty of opportunities that will get you into an adrenaline place, into a physical space, up and out of your desk, actually doing standing in front of a classroom teaching, or getting into becoming a pilot. Or a lot of ESTPs or a lot of surgeons rather, are ESTPs. So going into that route. Things that require adrenaline as part of your career is actually one of the best ways to keep yourself from having a mundane, boring life that encourages you to do things that are not in your best interests, that encourages you to dick with other people, and encourages you to come across as cold. Having an adrenaline-fueled life is actually one of the best ways to show up as a kind, considerate, rooting for the underdog person, because you're not just trying to entertain yourself. You are entertained by your life, and now you can have that piece sort of rest into the fact that your whole life is crafted for your personality, and now you can open yourself up to more relationships and being warm and not necessarily being frustrated and going to harmony in in a negative way, in an anger fueled way, or in a paranoid what everybody is thinking about you way. That's one of the best things you can do, is make sure that you are keeping adrenaline in your life as a daily experience.
And I think marrying that too, you mentioned several of the types of careers or activities where maybe a high performance, race car driver or a pilot or a surgeon, these also pull in on that Copilot process of accuracy, where you can focus on being precise, the precision and the accuracy combined with the adrenaline. That's really a superpower for you. When you combine these two functions, when you take that adrenaline that's just so natural that you feel really good about being in as an ESTP, and you can then bring in some kind of a precision element, a high performance precision element into that, where you have to focus on nuanced tweaks of precision, of focusing on the most accurate way to do something. Well, now we're talking about an unstoppable ESTP force in the world. And it doesn't matter whether it's politics, NASCAR driving, piloting, or academia. It doesn't matter. But if you can bring that precision element in, you are really going to increase your happiness and contentment and excitement in your life.
Yeah, you'll find your relationships improving. I think before I was trying to mention this, I think in kind of a clumsy way, but a lot of times ESTPs will unconsciously sabotage their relationships because they're bored and they're looking for something interesting to do. And so they'll end up being bigger dicks to the people they love than they intend to be, because they're just trying to figure out something that interests them. If they fold something interesting into their daily experience through either their career and a career that includes adrenaline or includes getting up and into their body, and if they can't do it through their work, then doing it through hobbies, like sports hobbies or something else that really gets them into a physical space, then they'll find themselves not dicking with their life, not sabotaging their relationships, because they aren't bored all the time. So boredom is possibly one of the biggest challenges that ESTPs face. And if you can make sure that you are not in a bored space, you'll have better relationships. You will be more connected with other people because you aren't exploiting them as something interesting to play with.
Well, and I agree. I think that's excellent. And I think I would add to that getting in your body is something that comes natural for you and makes you feel happy. And again, sometimes you're in situations where that's not possible. And I believe that if you access that accuracy process to optimize the experience you're in, let's say you do have to sit at a cubicle desk. Let's say you have a family and you're the sole breadwinner for the family, let's just say, hypothetically. And you do have to go to a day job where you're maybe in a computer programming department, or you're a system admin for computers or something, or whatever your job is. It doesn't really matter. If there's a way to begin to work on optimizing that and focus on the accuracy process around what you're doing, if you can't be in an adrenaline job, like in an adrenaline context, that accuracy can also give you the happiness you desire and also keep you from getting bored too, because you're now optimizing and perfecting a craft. You're becoming an artisan. You're becoming someone who really understands the nuance and the tweaks and can get to a point where you are optimizing that experience for yourself. And I think that's something else that can help you as well if you're forced to not be in your physical body all the time.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So what do you think? As an ESTP, you've been listening. You've been hearing this discussion with us. You're the third person in the room. You can't talk to us, obviously, because this is pre-recorded, but we want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com. Leave a comment, a question, some feedback. I want to hear about your experience as an ESTP in the world and some of the feedback and some of the information, some of the experiences you've had in your life. You can find this podcast at personalityhacker.com. Just search ESTP, and you can leave comments directly below it. We'd love to have you also join our community of like minds, people that are interested in personal growth through the lens of understanding your personality. You can find us over at facebook.com/personalityhacker or twitter.com/personalityhack.
If you enjoyed this podcast, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. And if you're in a giving mood, it would be awesome if you'd go to iTunes and leave a rating and review. The more ratings and reviews we get over time, the better we do in iTunes algorithm, and the more likely they are to recommend us under other podcasts. So if you are feeling a spirit of reciprocity, please go rate us and review us on iTunes.
Thanks so much for being a part of the podcast this week. My name is Joe Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.